Beth Sinclair was 26 years old when her whole world fell apart in a single night. It was raining that evening. A thin, steady November rain, the kind that turns the asphalt into a black mirror. Jake Sinclair had stayed late at work again. A client needed something finished by morning, and he never knew how to say no. He'd called Beth around 6, said he was heading out, that he'd grab milk on the way, maybe even that ice cream Emma loved so much. 7 o'clock came and went, then 8. By 9, Beth was calling him, calm at first, then with rising panic in her voice. His phone just rang and rang. She put the kids to bed even though her stomach was in knots, and kept dialing his number over and over, as if that alone could change something. At 10:30, someone knocked on the door. A police officer stood on the porch, young, clearly not used to this kind of visit, hat in his hands, wearing the face of a man who doesn't know how to begin the worst sentence of someone's life. "Mrs. Sinclair, I'm so sorry. There was an accident. Wet road, a car crossed the center line. Your husband, he didn't make it." Beth didn't remember sinking to the floor of the entryway. Didn't remember the officer helping her up, asking if there was someone he could call, standing there not knowing what else to say. All she remembered was the cold of a linoleum under her knees and the sound of rain against the window, the same rain that had turned the road into a death trap. 2 children slept in that house that night, 4-year-old Emma, who'd drawn her dad a card the day before just because, and 2-year-old Cole, who couldn't quite say dad yet but already knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. They had no idea their world would look different come morning. No more being tossed toward the ceiling. No more off-key lullaby about a cowboy and his faithful horse that Jake sang every night in a voice that was terrible and wonderful all at once. Beth sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her thoughts wouldn't settle. They kept circling back to the same question. What now? She hadn't worked in 5 years. Every ounce of her energy had gone into the kids and the house, while Jake built his career as an engineer. There were barely any savings. The mortgage, daycare, insurance ate through everything. She was alone, with no plan, no safety net, no clear thought about tomorrow. By the next afternoon, once the shock had dulled into something closer to numb practicality, she knew what she had to do: call her parents. There was no one else left to call. Robert and Diane Whitmore lived half an hour away, in a big house with a perfect lawn a landscaper tended weekly, 2 spotless cars in the garage. Beth had grown up with plenty of money, just never much warmth. Her parents had always been busy, her father's career at a law firm, her mother's social calendar, an endless string of country club dinners where you had to show your face. In that house, love had always been measured in birthday checks and carefully chosen gifts, never in hugs, never in real conversation, never in the feeling that someone actually saw you. Beth dialed the number, hands shaking, her voice cracking before she'd even said a word. "Mom? Dad?" She swallowed hard. "Jake died. Last night. A car accident. I really need your help. Just for a little while, until I figure out the funeral, the paperwork, everything." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. She could hear muffled voices, her father saying something quietly to her mother, his hand half over the receiver. Finally, Diane spoke, in the tone of someone canceling a dinner reservation, not comforting a daughter who'd just lost her husband. "Beth, honey, we're so sorry. Truly, this is a terrible tragedy. But you have to understand, we can't be your support system. Your father and I have our own lives, our own plans, our own schedule. You're a grown woman. You're 26. You have 2 kids. You're going to have to handle this on your own. That's just how life works." Beth sat there, stunned. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't asked to move in with them forever. She'd asked for a little warmth, a little presence, the kind of thing family is supposed to give you in the worst moment of your life. "Mom, I'm not asking to move in. Just be there for the first few days. Help with the funeral. Watch the kids for a couple of hours while I sort out the paperwork. We understand this is hard, her father cut in, speaking for the first time. But we have the Davenports' dinner next week. We can't just drop everything. Hire a sitter for God's sake. You should still have Jake's life insurance. The call ended with a polite, almost businesslike goodbye. Hang in there. We'll be thinking of you. And a short beep as the line went dead. Beth sat there holding the phone, staring into nothing. The ground had opened up under her a second time. Only this time, it wasn't just the present collapsing, but the last illusion that she had anyone to lean on. She was a widow with 2 children. No job, no money, no support, and, as she was realizing in that exact moment, no family in any sense of the word that actually mattered. The phone rang 2 days after the funeral, while Beth was still going through Jake's paperwork, sorting documents into piles just to keep her hands busy. The screen read, Ruth Sinclair. Beth froze, unsure if she should even answer. Jake's parents, Ruth and Walt, what could they possibly say now? Maybe to them she'd become nothing more than a stranger, their son's widow, a leftover piece of a life that no longer included them, someone they'd politely but firmly asked to keep her distance. She answered anyway, bracing for the worst. Ruth's voice was shaking, not with distance, but with the same raw grief tearing through Beth herself. Beth, sweetheart. Ruth could barely hold back tears. Walt and we can't sit still. Jake was our son, and he's gone, and there's no making sense of that. But we need you to hear one thing, clear as day. You and those children are our family. We already lost our son. We are not losing you, too. Beth broke down completely, sobbing openly for the first time in 2 days, not muffled into a pillow at night, but out loud, into the phone, listening to an older woman she'd only really known from holiday gatherings cry right along with her. Pack your things, Ruth said, pulling herself together. Come to the ranch. There's more than enough room for everyone. It's warm, and you will not be alone here. Don't think about anything else. Just come. A few hours later, an old but immaculately kept pickup truck pulled up outside Beth's house. Walt Sinclair, a sturdy man pushing 70, weathered face, hands calloused from a lifetime working the land, climbed out without a word. He didn't offer long condolences, didn't try to find the perfect comforting phrase. He just walked inside, took one look at the boxes and suitcases, scooped up a half-asleep, uncomprehending Cole, and said one single sentence, looking Beth square in the eye. This is your home now, too. No strings attached. The Sinclair Ranch stretched across a few hundred acres of rolling land out in Montana. Old but sturdy stables, a weathered yet solid house with a wide porch, corrals full of grazing horses, air thick with the smell of hay, earth, and distant mountains. Everything about the place carried the weight of generations of honest work. There was none of the polished show of Beth's parents' house, just something real, plain, and true. The first few weeks were brutal. Beth barely slept, jolted awake either by her own nightmares of the rain-slicked road, or by Cole crying for a father he'd barely gotten to know, or by Emma's quiet, bewildered questions. When's Daddy coming home from work? Questions that had no answer that wouldn't break her heart all over again. But Ruth was there every single night. She rocked Cole to sleep humming old cowboy songs, read to Emma until her eyes finally closed, and brewed Beth a cup of herbal tea every time she found her sitting out on the porch in the middle of the night, staring into the dark, unable to sleep. Walt, for his part, never pushed and never coddled her. He didn't ask, "How are you holding up?" every 5 minutes. Instead, he simply let her be there. Let her adjust. Let her breathe. One morning, when Beth was wandering the yard aimlessly, not knowing what to do with herself, He silently handed her a pitchfork. "Work heals better than feeling sorry for yourself," he said, no edge in his voice, just the quiet understanding of a man who'd buried his own grief in labor once. "But if you're not ready, that's fine too. The pitchfork isn't going anywhere." Beth was ready. She needed something to hold on to, some kind of anchor in the endless string of identical, grief-heavy days. That anchor turned out to be horses. Part 3. Juniper, 1700 to 2730. In the farthest corral, kept apart from the rest of the herd, stood a bay mare named Juniper. Half wild, jumpy, flinching at any sudden movement, with old scars along her flanks, the marks of bad hands from a previous owner. Walt had picked her up for next to nothing at an auction because no one else wanted to deal with a lost cause. "Should have just sold her for slaughter, old man," Tucker, the ranch hand who'd worked there for decades, would mutter. "That mare won't let anyone near her. Waste of time and feed." But Beth, who'd grown up devouring horse books in secret as a kid, the one real passion her parents tolerated only because it never interfered with the proper family schedule, saw something else in Juniper. Not a lost cause, a mirror. They were both wounded. Both had stopped trusting a world that had already shown them its worst side. Beth started showing up at the corral every day, early, before breakfast. She'd sit by the fence at a distance, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, just sitting there, an hour, sometimes two, watching the mare eye her warily, then, little by little, stop flinching at her presence. She never tried to catch the horse, never reached for a halter, never rushed a single moment of it. She talked to Juniper out loud, quietly, in an even voice, telling her about Jake, about the kids, about her fear of the future, everything she couldn't say to people, afraid of their pity, or worse, their indifference. The days turned into weeks. A month in, Juniper finally walked up on her own and cautiously sniffed Beth's outstretched hand, hovering half a step back, ready to bolt at any second. 3 months in, Beth ran a hand along her neck for the first time, and the mare didn't flinch away, just tensed and let it happen. 6 months in, Beth was riding her slowly across the hills behind the ranch, and something in Juniper's eyes had changed. The wariness had given way to trust, the fear to something like quiet friendship. Walt watched all of this with a pride he never quite hid, often stopping by the fence with a cup of coffee just to look on. "You've got a gift, Beth," he told her one evening, the two of them cleaning tack in the dim, leather and oil-scented barn. "You know how to talk to the ones everyone else already wrote off. That's rare. Jake would have been proud of you." That was the night the idea was born. That suggested to Ruth and Walt that they start a real breeding program, not just keeping horses for the ranch's own needs, but building a serious business around a patient, humane approach to the difficult, cast-off horses other outfits wouldn't touch. Walt hesitated. The ranch was barely breaking even as it was, and a new venture meant money they didn't have. But Ruth put a hand on his shoulder and said only, "Give her a shot, Walt. She's earned it. And I think this girl knows exactly what she's doing." The years that followed were years of relentless, exhausting, but meaningful work. Beth taught herself everything: equine genetics, basic veterinary care, financial planning, the fundamentals of marketing she'd never had the faintest idea about before. She was up before dawn, working the barn alongside Tucker and Walt, and after putting the kids to bed each night, she'd sit at the old kitchen table reading trade manuals by lamplight until her eyes gave out. Juniper's first foal, named Scout after Jake's favorite book, turned out to have a remarkable gift for dressage: fluid, almost dance-like movement, a calm but spirited temperament, an intelligence that horses with far cleaner pedigrees simply didn't have. Within 2 years, Scout won his first junior competition, beating out horses worth tens of times more. Word of the unusual mare and her extraordinary offspring started to spread, first among local breeders, then across the state. People came out to see a program built not on bloodlines or expensive pedigrees, but on character, patience, and real work with the animal. The very same approach Beth had once used on herself, all those hours sitting by the fence of a wild, unwanted horse. Emma and Cole grew up on that ranch, barefoot, sun-browned, riding confidently by the time they were 5 or 6, wrapped in the love of grandparents they'd called simply Grandma and Grandpa since they were old enough to talk, without any mental asterisk attached. To them, there was no distinction to make. Ruth and Walt were their real family, and the kids felt it down to their bones. 7 years after that terrible November night, Beth closed a deal that changed everything. A major equestrian holding company out of Kentucky, which had been watching her program's success for a while, offered to buy exclusive rights to her breeding methodology, along with a significant stake in her growing stable of elite horses. Negotiations dragged on for nearly a year, meetings, lawyers, auditors, until the final number came in at $100 million. Beth cried the day she signed the last of the paperwork, but not out of joy. She cried because Jake wasn't there to share this moment with her, the moment it seemed like everything had been building toward. But Ruth and Walt were there, holding her so tight it was like they were afraid to let go. And so were Emma and Cole, now much older, whooping and hollering, not really grasping the numbers, but absolutely certain something enormous had just happened for their family. The first thing Beth did with the money was pay off the mortgage on the ranch, wiping out decades of debt that had weighed on Walt his entire adult life. The second thing was build a modern veterinary clinic for their growing operation. The third was launch a scholarship fund for kids from struggling families who wanted to learn to work with horses, giving them the same chance she'd once been given herself. Word of her success spread quickly through business circles. A photo of Beth Sinclair, the young widow who'd built a multi-million-dollar business from absolutely nothing, landed on the cover of a major regional business magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Learned to Speak Horse and Speak Money." Success didn't erase the hole Jake had left behind. It never does. It just gave Beth the means to fill it as best she could, with Ruth and Walt standing right beside her, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of raising 2 kids who'd lost their father before either of them had the words to understand what lost even meant. Emma was the one who remembered him, in fragments, a smell of sawdust on his jacket, the particular way he mispronounced her name when he was being silly. She'd grown into a serious, watchful 7-year-old by the time the ranch started to feel like solid ground again, and every so often, something small would knock the wind out of her. A dad picking up his daughter from school in the parking lot, a commercial with a father teaching his son to fish. The worst of it came during her 2nd grade class assignment, draw your family and write about your dad's job. Emma sat frozen at the kitchen table that evening, pencil hovering over blank paper, until she finally burst into tears and said the sentence that broke Beth's heart clean in half. "I don't remember what his voice sounds like anymore, Mom. I try, and I can't hear it." Beth didn't have an answer that could fix that. What she had was an old voicemail Jake had left her 2 weeks before he died, complaining cheerfully about a burnt casserole. And she played it for Emma that night, and the night after, until the sound of his voice stopped being something she had to strain to remember and became something she carried instead. Walt filled in where he could, in his own quiet, unshowy way. When Emma turned 8, her school held a father-daughter dance, the kind of event that seemed engineered specifically to remind fatherless kids exactly what they didn't have. Beth almost kept her home, rather than watch her sit it out, Instead, Walt put on his one good shirt, the collar a little too tight around his neck, and drove Emma to the gymnasium himself.
"I'm not your dad, kiddo," he told her in the truck, gruff and a little awkward, the way he always was with anything resembling sentiment. "Wouldn't try to be. But I've got 2 good feet and no plans tonight. So if you'll have me, I'd be honored." Emma talked about that dance for years, not because the decorations were nice, but because for one evening she hadn't been the girl without a dad. She'd just been a girl dancing with someone who showed up. Cole's grief looked different because he had almost no actual memories to grieve, just an absence shaped like a father-sized hole he sensed more than understood. He acted out around age 6, getting into scuffles at school, snapping at Beth over nothing, until a counselor gently suggested that some of it was simple, unprocessed anger. Anger at a dad who, from a 6-year-old's logic, had simply left and never come back. It was Walt who found a way through, not with words, but with work. He started taking Cole out to the barn before school most mornings, teaching him to muck stalls, to check a horse's hooves for stones, to sit quiet and still around a nervous yearling the same way Beth had once sat with Juniper. Somewhere in those early mornings, mucking out stalls side by side in the cold, Cole started talking. Really talking. The kind of talk that comes easier when you're not looking someone in the eye. "Do you think Dad would have liked horses?" he asked once, not looking up from the stall he was raking. "He grew up on this ranch," Walt answered, just as steady. "Kid used to fall asleep in the hayloft, so yeah, I think he'd have liked them just fine. I think he'd have liked watching you with them even more." There were harder moments no amount of love from Ruth and Walt could fully soften. Cole's Little League team held a father-son campout the summer he turned 10, and he came home from practice that day and quietly told Beth he didn't want to go. She sat with him on his bed and asked why, already half knowing the answer. "Everyone else is bringing their dad," he said, staring at his shoes. "I don't want people asking where mine is." Walt ended up going, of course. He wouldn't have missed it, and Cole, after some persuading, let him come. But Beth never forgot the flash of pure grief on her son's face that afternoon, the particular unfairness of it. That grief didn't come with an expiration date, that it could ambush a child at a summer campout just as easily as at a funeral. High school brought its own reckonings. Emma's 16th birthday, the one Jake used to joke he'd celebrate by polishing his shotgun for every boy who came calling, arrived without him, and Emma spent part of that evening locked in her room, not crying exactly, just sitting with the strange math of turning an age her father would never see her be. Beth found her staring at an old photo of Jake holding her as a newborn, and simply sat down next to her on the floor, saying nothing, letting the silence be enough. Cole's turn came at his high school graduation. Walt, well into his 70s by then, insisted on standing the entire ceremony despite his bad hip, refusing to sit until Cole's name was called and he could see him cross that stage. Afterward, in the parking lot, Cole hugged his grandfather so hard and so long that Emma had to remind them both that people were waiting. "Proud of you, son," Walt said, and the word, son, hung in the air a beat longer than either of them acknowledged out loud. Beth watched all of it from a small, careful distance over the years, grateful in a way she could never fully put into words for the fact that her children hadn't grown up in a house defined by absence, but in one defined, however imperfectly, by 2 people who kept showing up in a dead man's place. Not to replace him, but to make sure his children never had to face the biggest days of their lives entirely alone. The phone rang exactly 1 week after that article hit the stands. "Beth?" Sweetheart, it's us. Diane's voice was warm and easy, like there hadn't been 7 years of dead silence, like there had never been that November phone call that offered nothing but a polite goodbye. We saw the magazine. Oh my God, honey, we are just so proud of you. We always knew you had it in you. You were always such a strong girl. Beth held the phone to her ear and felt something crack in her chest. Not from pain this time, but from a sharp, almost physical recognition. She knew that light, breezy tone far too well. The ease with which her mother could rewrite an entire history, like an editor cutting an inconvenient scene from a film. The calls turned into visits. Cautious ones at first, Robert and Diane just stopping by, bearing expensive but hollow gifts for grandchildren they were meeting for the first time, whose names they initially got mixed up. Then Beth's brother, Chase Whitmore, entered the picture. The same brother who hadn't sent her so much as a single text in all those years, not even when he'd heard, through distant relatives, that Jake had died. Chase was especially persistent. He talked about family investments, about how blood matters more than circumstances, about how great it would be to pool resources for the family's shared prosperity. On one visit, he even pitched Beth on buying into his failing organic snacks startup. To support your own brother, like family's supposed to do. Robert and Diane, meanwhile, started showing up at public events, introducing themselves to reporters and business partners as the incredibly proud parents of a successful entrepreneur. In one local TV interview, Diane, voice cracking with rehearsed emotion, talked about how they'd always believed in their daughter and stood by her through the hardest times, without once mentioning that phone call the night of the accident. Beth read these interviews with a kind of bitter, almost numb disbelief. The lies were so shameless, so polished, they were almost impressive in their audacity. Ruth, quietly watching all of it unfold, said one evening at dinner, once the kids had gone off to their rooms, calmly but firmly, "You know, honey, some people only show up in your life once they catch the scent of success, like vultures circling. Real family isn't about the blood in your veins. It's about who was there when things smelled like trouble, not money." Beth knew that better than anyone alive. But now she had to figure out what to do with that knowledge and how to protect the people she actually loved from it. Without telling a soul except her own attorney, Beth started moving, methodically, coldly. She sat down with a legal team out of Helena and spent several weeks putting together a detailed, airtight plan to protect her assets, and, more importantly to her, to protect the people she genuinely considered her real family. First, she set up an irrevocable trust in Emma and Cole's names, fully securing their futures, quality education, a financial head start into adulthood, independence, regardless of any outside claims or family drama that might arise down the road. Second, she formally transferred a substantial share of the business and property into Ruth and Walt's names, guaranteeing them a peaceful, secure retirement and full, unconditional control of the ranch that had once taken her in without asking a single question. Third, she established the Jake Sinclair Memorial Fund, the same scholarship program for at-risk kids and unwanted, discarded horses, directing a significant portion of her remaining capital there, so Juniper Story could keep saving others. Her biological parents and her brother got nothing on paper. Not out of spite. Beth made that clear to her lawyer more than once, her voice almost pained. But because trust and genuine presence in someone's life can't be bought retroactively. And inheritance, in her mind, belonged to the people who'd shared the real hardship with her, not the ones trying to claim credit for a success they'd had no part in building. The attorney finalizing the last documents looked at her over his glasses one day and asked, "Most people find it incredibly hard to formally cut out blood relatives. Are you completely sure about this?" Beth looked back at him, calm, without a trace of doubt. Blood relatives aren't automatically family. Family is a choice people make, over and over, day after day. not an accident of birth. A month later, the Sinclair Ranch hosted a formal gala for the grand opening of a new equestrian school under the Jake Sinclair Fund. String lights lit up the wide yard, and the crowd included business partners, local reporters, and neighboring ranchers, the very same people who, years earlier, had written Juniper off as a lost cause without a second thought. Beth was mid-speech on a small stage when she noticed movement near the front gate. Robert, Diane, and Chase were making their way through the crowd, uninvited, dressed to the nines, wearing carefully rehearsed smiles, clearly counting on a warm public reception in front of the cameras. Diane tried to grab the microphone the moment Beth finished her opening remarks, addressing the crowd with forced, saccharine warmth. "We are just so proud of our daughter. The Whitmore family has always supported—" "I'm sorry," Beth cut in, quiet but absolutely unshakable, gently taking the microphone back. Her voice never wavered. "Since you brought up family, let me tell everyone here what that word actually means to me." The crowd went silent. Beth's eyes moved slowly across the faces in front of her, settling on Ruth and Walt, standing a little apart from the rest, hands clasped tightly together, the way they'd held on to each other for years. 7 years ago, when I lost my husband and was left alone with 2 small children, I called my parents and asked for help. They told me, word for word, that they couldn't be my support system. That same night, my husband's parents called me and said one simple thing: "Pack your bags, you're our family now. No conditions." Robert visibly paled. Diane tried to interject, but Beth kept going, steady and even. No anger, no need to humiliate anyone. Just the plain clarity of someone finally choosing to say the truth out loud, in front of witnesses, once and for all. Family isn't blood in your veins. Family is who shows up when the phone rings in the middle of the worst night of your life, who hands you a pitchfork to help you work through your grief instead of drowning in pity for you, who sits with you until sunrise just so you're not alone. Real love doesn't keep a ledger. It doesn't show up only when it smells like money, and it never disappears the moment it smells like trouble. She turned to Ruth and Walt, her voice finally breaking with the tenderness she'd been holding back all night. "This is my real family. The people who loved me when I had absolutely nothing left but grief and 2 frightened, confused children. And I will be grateful for the rest of my life that I found them, even at that terrible a cost." A quiet murmur of approval rolled through the crowd. Then someone started clapping, and within moments, most of the guests had joined in. Robert, Diane, and Chase, unwilling to stand there and face dozens of watching eyes any longer, quietly slipped out of the gala, trailed by the stares of people who, just minutes earlier, had been ready to believe in the carefully constructed image of a loving, supportive family. Ruth walked over and pulled Beth into a tight hug, the same way she'd held her for 7 years now, simply, with no conditions, no fine print. "You okay, honey?" she asked quietly. "I'm home," Beth said, and for the first time in a long while, there wasn't a trace of bitterness in those words, just calm, final certainty. "That's really all that matters." Late that night, once the guests had gone and Emma and Cole were fast asleep after a long day, Beth stepped out onto the same porch where, 7 years earlier, crushed by grief, she'd once sat with a mug of cold coffee, having no idea how she'd keep going. Now she looked out at the same hills, the same distant Montana stars, but she was seeing them through entirely different eyes. Somewhere out in the corral, Juniper let out a soft whinny, as if reminding her one more time of a simple truth. The road from total despair to a real, warm home doesn't always run through blood. Sometimes it runs through the handful of people who simply stay, right when staying is the hardest thing in the world to do. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about something, hit the button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a like on the video and let us know in the comments.
What do you think makes a real family? Blood? Or the people who actually stick around? If you want to see more stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications to catch them first. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.